Hello everyone, welcome back. In this session we will talk about sixth object type in Python, which is other object type. Now this object type again has some subcategories and we will talk about each subcategory one by one in this session. So without wasting any time, let's start our discussion. The very first object type is the none object type. This object type has only one value, which is none. And what does it indicate? It indicates absence of values. So if we look at this example, def hello world, and this return is not returning anything. So this return statement is not returning anything. So what will happen when we will call this function and we'll try to print the value returned by this function? Python will give us the response as none. Now let's try this in PyCharm. So we'll try to write a function here, hello world, and this function will have only return statement, but it will not return anything. Now we will call the function and then we will print the value returned by the function. Now let's run this code. So you can see here, since this function is not returning anything, and that is why Python is giving us response as none. Okay, so this is the none object type. Now the second object type in this category is the not implemented. Again, this object type again has only one value, which is not implemented, and it can be used in a function when something is not implemented. For example, if we look at this function test value, it takes two parameters, var1 and var2. Now inside this function, one condition has been written that if the value of both the parameters are equal, then return not implemented. So what does this not implemented word actually means? So this simply means that the logic for this condition is not implemented in the function. So when this condition will be matched, then it will return the response as not implemented. Now let's try this in PyCharm. So what we will do, we'll create a function which will take two parameters, var1 and var2, and inside it I'll write one condition that if var1 equals to var2, then return not implemented. Now let's call this function. So we'll call the function by passing same value, and then when we will try to print the value returned by this function, we will get the response as not implemented, which shows that if this condition is matched inside this function, the logic for this condition is not implemented. That is why we are getting response as not implemented. So this is all about the not implemented object type. Now the next object type is the ellipsis object type. This object type again has only one value, which is denoted as 3 dots. And this indicates that something is still in progress. It is still not completed. It is still in implementation phase. So when we look at this example, test, again this function test is accepting two parameters, var1 and var2, and when the value of both the parameters are same, it is saying return 3 dots. So when we will try to call this function by passing same value, what will happen? It will return response as ellipsis. Now let's try this here. So what we will do, instead of in the same function which we wrote for not implemented, we will remove not implemented word and write here 3 dots. Now let's run the code again. So you can see here, it is returning the response as ellipsis, which denotes that the logic for this condition, var1 equals to var2, is still in the implementation phase. This is all about the ellipsis object type. Next one is the type annotation object type. Now, this annotation type object is basically a label associated with variable or class attributes or function parameter or return value. Okay, so why this label is used? It is used as a type hint which denotes the expected type of the variable or the class attribute or function parameter or return value. Okay, so this object type is basically used in a situation to denote, let's say there is a function and it is accepting one parameter, and I just want to denote that this parameter will be of integer type. Okay, so this integer type will be a label and we call it as an annotation object type. Again, this is optional, so it is not strictly enforced by Python. What does it mean? It means that even though I have labeled that the parameter of my function will accept as an integer value, but if instead of integer if I pass the string value also, then Python is not going to give us any error because it is not strictly enforced by Python. Okay, now again, this object annotation type object has two types. Okay, first one is the generic alias type and second one is the union type. Now let's talk about each one of these one by one. First of all, we'll talk about generic alias type. This alias type is basically the objects which can be created by subscripting a container class such as list, tuple or dictionary. So we call list, tuple or dictionary as a container class in Python. Now if you look at this example, it is saying tuple and then in the closing bracket value integer is written. So what does it mean? It means that this tuple will be of integer elements only. Again, if I have written here list and in the closing bracket I have written bytes, so what does it mean? It means that it is the list of byte elements. Now in the third example, if I have written dictionary and in the closing bracket I have defined two parameters, or you can say two object types. Okay, why? Because dictionary is a key value pair, so we'll have to separately specify the data type of key as well as the data type of value. That is why we have written here two values, string comma integer. And what does it mean? It means that the keys of the dictionary will be of a string type and the values of the dictionary will be of integer type. Okay, now let's see one example here. So here in this function display, what it is doing, it is accepting one parameter var and it is clearly labeling here that this particular parameter will accept list of integer elements. Okay, so it is still not strictly enforced. So if you pass any float value inside the list, then also the value will be accepted here. But this label is used just to help other developers to understand what kind of the value is being passed in this function. Okay, so now let's try this in PyCharm. So what we will do, we'll first remove this and we will create a function called display. In display, I'll write var and say list of integer. And then what I'll do, well, I'll say val in var and then print val. Okay, now at the time of calling this function, let's say if I call this function and inside it I pass the list of integer elements, what will happen? We are getting the response as all the values of the list are printed one by one. Now instead of this, again, I mean including this, if I pass one float value here, what will happen? Python is not going to give us any error. It will accept the value. That is why we say that annotation type object is not strictly enforced in Python. It is just used to label that this is a function and this function accepts one parameter var, and it would be better to pass list of integer elements only inside this function. Otherwise, there might be some logic written inside this function which will give you error. Okay. Now, let's see another example. In this example, what it is doing, it is accepting a dictionary as a parameter, and it is clearly specifying that the key of the dictionary should be of string type and the value of the dictionary should be of integer type. Okay. Now let's try this in PyCharm. So what we will do, we'll remove everything and create a display function again, but this time it will accept dictionary as a parameter. And here what we will do, we'll say dict of str comma integer. Okay. And then what we will do, we'll just try to print all the key and value in dictionary. So it will be var dict.items, and then it will print the value key comma value. Okay. Now let's call this function. So it is display, and inside display we'll pass a dictionary. So let's say I pass a dictionary of 2 elements, that means 2 key value pairs. What will happen? So now you can see here in the response we are getting both the key and the values of the dictionary. Okay, so this label says that it will accept the dictionary as a response. Okay, so this is always helpful to understand for the developer, that I need to pass the dictionary as a parameter inside the function display. Now let's say if I try to pass any other value, what will happen? Suppose if I'm not aware what this function is accepting, and instead of it I pass here a list of integer elements. What will happen? We will get the error. Why? Because this items function works only on the dictionary, and we are passing list of integer as a parameter inside display function. As I said that this is not strictly enforced, so at the time of passing the value, Python is not giving any error. At the time of executing a for loop on the dictionary, or you can say the list item, it is giving us error because this items function exists only for dictionary, not for list. Okay, so this is all about the generic alias type. Now the next type of the annotation type object is the union type. This type basically represents bitwise OR operation on multiple types of the objects. So for example, so you can see here what it is doing. It is saying that there is a function total underscore count, and this function accepts one parameter, and the name of the parameter is var, and the data type that this function can accept is either list of integer or either list of float. So this bitwise is used to separate the type of the object this function can accept. Okay, again it is not strictly enforced. If you try to pass any other value, it will be accepted here. It may be possible that this at this line you will get error because some will work only on the list or tuple. So in that case, if you pass any, let's say if you pass here dictionary, this sum is going to give us error. Okay, and also you can see here this arrow, what this arrow denotes. So this arrow denotes the response, and the response of this function can be either integer or it can be float. Now let's try this in PyCharm. So we'll write a function and we'll say var, and then it can be either list of integer or it can be either list of float. Now what we will do, we'll just write here one simple statement, return sum of var. So what it is doing, it is just giving us the total sum of the elements of the list, which is either integer or either float. Also, what we can do, we can specify here the return type, integer and or float. Okay, so what does it mean? That the return type of this function will be either integer or float. So now let's call this function. While calling this, I'll pass first integer values. Okay, now let's run this. Okay, sorry. So now this will accept the result and we'll have to print the result. Okay, now let's run the code again. So you can see here we are getting response as 10. Similarly, if I pass a float value here, instead of 3, I can write here 3.3, and then I can write here 4.4. So again, you can see here in the response, when we try to pass the list of integer elements, we got the response as an integer only. Now this time we are passing list of float values, float elements. So we are getting the response as a float, 11.0. This is what our return statement is saying. So it is just the label. Okay, it is not strictly enforcing that the return type should always be either integer or float. Okay, so it can be any other object type as well. But this label is just used to help the programmers, other programmers, to understand that what kind of the object type this function is expected to return. And in the same way, what kind of the object this function can accept as a parameter, which can be either list of integer or list of float. Okay, so this is all about the union type. Now the next type of the object in the other object type category is the DateTime object. This object is used to deal with date and time in Python. And there is a DateTime library available in Python which is used to manipulate date and time. Here is the example. So what we are doing here, we are first importing the DateTime library, and then we are calling from the DateTime library there is a class called DateTime, and from that class we are calling date class to print the current date. And similarly, from the DateTime class we are calling a time method to print the current time. Now let's try this here. So what we will do, we'll say from DateTime import DateTime. What does it mean? That inside there is a file called, or there is a module called DateTime. Inside the DateTime module there is a class called DateTime. And now what we will do, we'll say print DateTime dot date, in the, we'll apply parenthesis, and then inside the parenthesis we will write DateTime dot now. What will happen? We are getting the response as the current date. Okay, similarly, instead of date, if I write here time, what will happen? It will give us the response as the current time along with some fraction of the seconds. Okay, so this is all about the DateTime object type. The next object type is the calendar object type. This object type represents calendar in Python, and this is the example. Now let's see how we can print calendar in Python. So what we will do, we'll open a terminal here. Yeah, this is the terminal, and inside the terminal what I'll do, I'll say Python hyphen calendar 2024. So, oops, sorry, I think I missed one thing. So that is -m. So now you can see here, it is giving me the calendar, the entire calendar from January to December for the year 2024. Now there is a library called calendar in Python. We'll talk about this library later on in our further sessions. But for now, you just need to understand that calendar is again a object type in Python. Now the next object type is the classes object type. We will talk about classes and instance when we will talk about the OOPS concept in or object oriented concept in Python. So class is basically used to represent the collection of attributes and methods, and this is the class. So suppose that there is a class called car, and now this we know that car has a color and then it has a body. Okay, so we have defined two variables or two attributes inside the car class, color and body, and then we are displaying the color and the body of the car class. Okay, so this is all about the class object type. We'll try to run this code in the next object type, that is the instance object type. Now this instance object type is used to represent the object of a class. All the methods and the attributes of a class are attached to the instance. So that means you can call the instance and attributes, or you can say methods and attributes of a class using the instance or the object of a class. So this is the example. So if you remember, in the classes object type, we saw this class, and now the only difference is that we are creating an object of this class, and then we are calling all the attributes as well as the method of the class. Now let's try this in PyCharm. So what we will do, we'll first remove everything here, and here we will write class called car, and the first attribute of the class car is color, second attribute is body, and then we will create a method, that is display. Inside display method, what we will do, we'll just say self dot color comma self dot body. Now we will create an object of this class. So let's say if I write here obj equals to car. Now the object of this car class is created. Now the next thing that we need to do is, inside the print function we can call the attribute of the class. Similarly for this one, for body, we'll again call obj.body, and then we will call the method of the class, that is obj.display. Now let's run this code. So now when we executed this code, you can see here it is giving us the response, and whatever the color and the body was specified as an attribute inside this class, the value of the attributes color and body are printed here, red and sedan. And then when we called this method display, inside this method we again specified that the color and the body of the car class should be printed, and that is why in the third row we are getting response as red and sedan. Okay, so this is all about the instance object type in. Now the next type of the object is the exception object type. So we know that during execution of a program, an error might occur in the program. Okay, we call that error as an exception. And it might be possible that our code is syntactically correct, but we can still get the exception or error at runtime. So some of the common exceptions in Python are exception, assertion error, arithmetic error, syntax error, system error, and zero division error. Okay, so this is the example of the exception object type. And what we are doing here, we are just trying to print the value 10 divided by 0. And we know that 0 cannot be used to divide any value in mathematics. So in that case, we will get the response as zero division error. Now let's try this here in PyCharm. What we will do, we'll simply write here print 10 divided by 0. And when we will run our code, we will get the response as zero division error, division by 0. Okay, so this is an example of the exception object type. That's all for this session. See you in the next session. Thank you.